The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, Lead in the Water, Disclosing Lead Service Lines. Today's webinar is being hosted by NCSL. For a schedule of upcoming webinars, please visit www.ncsl.org. My name is Doug Farquhar, and I'm the Environmental Health Program Manager at NCSL, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. To begin with, we're going to ask a few poll questions to kind of get a lay of the land out there. If you can see, there is the poll option on your computer there, and if you can take a look, you can see that we will have two poll questions, and you can answer either yes, no, or I don't know. So how many of you know if disclosure of lead service lines is required by your state law? And it looks like about 18% do know it's required and about 18% do not know if it's required, but most of you, 64%, are unfamiliar about your state law. We're going to try one more poll questions. How many of you have checked to see if your local water utility has a list of lead service lines in your community? There we go. And we have launched the second poll. We've closed that poll. Looks like about 40% knows about the list, 20% do not know, and about 40% are unfamiliar both ways. So today we're going to be talking about both those issues, about approaches states have taken to promote the disclosure and transparency of lead service lines to the owners and buyers of properties. To begin with, I want to mention that the webinar is being recorded, and registrants will be able to access a recording of the webinar and presentation slides on the NCSL website. Today's speakers are Laura Caron with the Massachusetts Legislature. We also have Kathy Bernardino Bailey of the Cincinnati Waterworks and Tom Milner with the Environmental Defense Fund. Our presenters today will be answering questions after the final presentation. Please type your questions into the question box on the right side of your screen at any time during the webinar. We'll collect those and be asking them at the end. The first speaker today we have is Laura Caron with the Massachusetts Legislature. Laura is a native of the Boston area and goes to school at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, studying international political economy. Last summer, she worked for Massachusetts State Senator Jason Lewis, leading a research project on lead poisoning across the state. As a result of this research, she worked with Senator Lewis's staff to draft legislation that would require homeowners and renters in the state to disclose lead pipes, including lead service lines, upon renting or selling a home. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura. Laura?
Thank you, Doug. I can't see the slides right now. Are they up?
Yes, they are up. We can see them. Your first slide is up, and it says progress on lead exposure.
Great. Well, as we know, lead poisoning generally affects children, and it's measured by testing how much lead is in a child's blood, which is called their blood lead level. And so the CDC sets a warning line at 5 micrograms per deciliter of lead in the blood, but ideally a child should have no lead in their blood at all. So looking at these blood lead levels, we see that we've made a lot of progress since the 1970s. In fact, these average blood lead levels have fallen by more than 70% since then, especially due to important legislation like the 1971 Lead Paint Poisoning Prevention Act. But as you can see in this chart here, using data from Massachusetts cities and towns, our progress has slowed a lot during the last 6 or 7 years. So my question is, what's causing us to be unable to lower these average blood lead levels now compared to before? If I can go to the next slide, please.
The next slide is forwarded.
So what I did was a quantitative analysis using data from Massachusetts cities and towns to try to puzzle out what factors are still relevant in predicting lead poisoning in children across the state. So I used data that's been collected over many years for over 30 of the largest cities and towns in Massachusetts. And I used that data to answer two fundamental questions. What factors are leading to increases in lead poisoning today, and what can legislation do to help reduce this risk of lead poisoning? So all of this data is on the city and town level, not the individual level, but it gives us some clues as to what to look for. I found that significant factors in predicting lead poisoning included lead in the water, lead paint in houses in the town, and lower income. But most importantly, the combination of these three factors could explain the vast majority of the increased risk of lead poisoning in different cities and towns in the state, meaning that we don't really have to look for other unrelated causes. So in this analysis, all the homes and towns receive their water from the same source, the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority, which has very low levels of lead at the source. But these water tests were all done at household faucets, and many of them indicated high levels of lead. So we know that the lead is getting introduced somewhere between the street and the drinking faucet, quite possibly in lead service lines. So focusing on the lead in water, we can see a significant positive correlation between children with high blood lead levels and levels of water in a community. Now, this data is cross-sectional for about 38 Massachusetts communities in 2015. And this was significant in my analysis, even when controlling for lead paint and low income in a community. So having lead in the water is still a significant risk factor for having high levels of lead in children's blood. But again, when we look at, next slide, please. And we'll see that Massachusetts has made a lot of progress on lowering lead in the water in recent years. Since the 1990s, changes to water chemistry have been very effective in lowering lead levels in water, and we're definitely below the EPA's action level of 15 parts per billion. Next slide. But when we look at the last 6 or 7 years, we don't see a whole lot of progress. Here in this chart, we see all different Massachusetts communities since 2011. And we see that within each community, the level of lead as measured by the height of each colored bar isn't necessarily decreasing, and there's definitely no clear downward trend. And then when we look at them all stacked together in an attempt to kind of magnify the very small effects and see them together as an aggregate, again, we don't see much of a downward trend at all. So how can we further reduce the levels of lead in water to make sure that we're actually making progress on this issue and lowering the risk of lead poisoning in children? Next slide. The simple way to do this is to require disclosure of lead pipes, including lead service lines. Currently in Massachusetts, homeowners or landlords don't have to tell buyers or renters if there are lead pipes or lead service lines in a home. But this kind of disclosure is required for lead paint and surfaces, and it's been very effective. So what we've done in Senator Lewis's office is filed legislation adding lead pipes to existing disclosure laws. so that they would work in exactly the same way as lead paint hazards. This is similar to what a few other states have done and is relatively easy to implement, has a low impact on the state budget, and it's fairly easy for home sellers and landlords to reach compliance, especially when you compare them to more stringent laws that apply to lead paint and surface hazards, which actually require removal of the hazards. Disclosure is especially important because with this basic information, homeowners can choose to prioritize replacement of lead pipes, primarily service lines from the street. Meanwhile, residents, including renters, can take steps to protect themselves, like running the water before they drink it to reduce the amount of lead that accumulates as it sits in the pipes. Disclosure is a really powerful way to have a direct impact on reducing lead levels in water and helping reduce lead poisoning across the state without creating a huge burden on homeowners or the state. So that's what we've tried to do in Senator Lewis's office. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was very informative. Our next speaker is Kathy Bailey with the Greater Cincinnati Waterworks. Kathy is a director as director, she leads all aspects of water utility, overseeing the day-to-day operations of 625 people with an operating budget of $140 million. She received her BS in chemistry from the University of Cincinnati, and she is working on receiving her MA in management. Currently, she serves as the Water Research Foundation board member. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Kathy. Kathy?
Thank you. So I'm going to speak about our current program in Cincinnati. We call it our Enhanced Lead Program, and we look at it as a two-tier approach to reducing the risk of lead in our community. Next slide. Some general information about us real quick. We are a drinking water and stormwater utility. We serve over 1.1 million customers in our region through 241,000 accounts. Next slide. In the city of Cincinnati, we have 52 unique neighborhoods. In the city of Cincinnati proper, we also have about 298,000 residents. 1 in 4 of those residents are 18 years old or younger. Unfortunately, we have the second highest child poverty rate in the country, which is a challenge for us. Regarding our service lines, we have about 15,000 full lead service lines left in place in our system. We know the addresses of those locations from our records, and we've kept those records over a number of years. In addition to that, we believe we have about 27,000 lead service lines left on the private side, and we actually have data related to that as well because we've done partials at those locations. We also recognize that where we have these remaining lead service lines, we know that there's a number of people of color in those neighborhoods, as well as many low-income customers and renters, and so that presents a unique challenge for us as we try to figure out a way to remove the remaining service lines. Next slide. So with us, how do we start our program? For us, we certainly have had for a number of years a great corrosion control treatment practice that's working for us. We've been in compliance with the lead and copper rule. Since 1971, we've actually been removing lead service lines as partials as part of our water main replacement program. And with all of that, it was certainly working, but in 2015, at the end of 2015, we came together as a team internally and said, is this program still working? Do we need to do more for our lead program? And with that, we decided, based on the National Drinking Water Advisory Council, as well as certainly the national attention that was occurring with Flint, we wanted to look at our program and revise it and improve it. And so certainly we went from the lead program and we enhanced it and called it the Enhanced Lead Program. And at that point, we clearly said that our goal was to reduce the risk of lead. We felt that the time was certainly now for us to go forward and any additional approvals that we might need from our council members to put a program in place. And we wanted to approach it as a two-tier solution. Next slide. So the remaining of the slides really speak to the two tiers, and I want to speak in detail about some of the highlights that are here. Tier 1 for us was really all about communication and education. It was important for us to really get in front of our community and let them know more about lead in drinking water, the situation here in Cincinnati, what could possibly occur, did we have any lead service lines, etc. And so as you can see, there's a number of initiatives we started under Tier 1, 3 of which I would like to highlight and spend a little more time on today, which is our lead website, our free lead testing, and then our lead service line lookup map. Next slide. So our lead website is lead.mygcww.org. This is a website where we have just a number of informational materials here. It's an opportunity for our customers to come here and look at the results from our testing in schools, request a test kit, look at past newsletters, click links to go to our lead map, etc. And so this has been helpful in our community and certainly just serves as a melting pot of all the information that we have related to our lead program. Next slide. Free testing, residential testing was a big one for us. We wanted to make sure that our customers knew that they could reach out to us and just request a kit, and we would analyze their water for free. And so this is a screenshot of our lead dashboard. It's an internal dashboard that we use on a regular basis, and it gives us a lot of information about the requests that we receive from our residential customers. As an example of what we're looking at here, if you look at the second row, as of December 12th, we had actually shipped 5,433 lead testing kits. 3,539 of those had been received back from the customer. We had analyzed and validated the results for 3,524 of those, and of that sample pool, 118 of those had lead results that were greater than 15 parts per billion. And so this is just a quick way for us to capture what's going on with our customers. There's a couple hot spots here where we can actually click on those numbers and drill down further. As an example, the 118, I can click on that, and then behind the scenes, I can see the 118 addresses and start to see if there's any trends on streets or neighborhoods, so we can have some different conversations with our customers in those neighborhoods. Next slide. This is a screenshot of our lead lookup map. This is a big one for us. We were very happy to offer this as a way for us to disclose our lead service lines throughout our system here. Any customer can come to this lookup map and put in an address, and that address will return the materials of the service line on the public as well as the private side. So as an example here, if you're looking at the map, what you want to see and be happy about would be 2 green boxes, which would indicate that the public side and the private side is non-lead material. If you, however, have a yellow box, then that yellow is an indicator of lead, either on the public or private side or both. And so this was just a great opportunity for us to really help our customers know the property, because we were experiencing customers calling in wanting to know their property, their mother's property, their daughter's property, etc. And this way, a customer can really help themselves and key in a number of addresses and know the materials at that property, and look for their family members as well. Next slide. So for us, we really were in tune with our schools regarding our program, and I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about our school program and how we were able to help them understand and disclose their service line materials, and then work with them through a partnership for testing. But we wanted to certainly reach out to our customers and our schools and preschools and daycares first, and then we came back after the fact and worked with our rec centers churches, libraries, etc. But our schools were an interest to us because of just the children that were in the schools. And so we knew that some of them wanted to have their water tested in the schools, but were leery of how to do that. And they were afraid from the perspective of the media pouncing on them and knocking on their door and being there every day and wanting to see their results, etc. And then they also were a little worried about, well, what if they found something and how would they handle it? And so we thought about that and put together a very elaborate partnership, which has worked out very well for us as well as for them. And so I'll walk you through those steps. Next slide, please. It's actually about 10 steps, but to quickly explain those to you, we start out with them. They call us certainly and say that they would like to partner with us for some free lead testing within their facilities. And so we look at our records and we explain to them what we believe their service line material is at the school and any of their other facilities on their campus. And so then, if needed, we verify the actual service lines on their property. We provide them with a copy of the U.S. EPA 3T's guidelines on how to test for lead in drinking water in schools and how to reduce that lead content. And then a big part for us was to walk through the schools with them. We partner with them and their maintenance staff. We have a school liaison here that walks through the schools with the maintenance staff and identifies which locations to sample. And that's a big one. So after we identify those locations, we provide them with labeled sample bottles and then a chain of custody form that they need to complete, and then they collect the samples for us. Next slide. We then analyze the samples, and if the results are greater than 15 parts per billion, we certainly call and discuss those results right away. But then we also talk about and consider if they need to resample at any locations and what type of assistance they might need with a remediation plan. But the big thing that they all look for and want, and they use it as a communication piece with their school community, is we send them a very detailed summary level, and there's a snapshot of it there on the screen. But in that summary letter, it actually gives them next steps. I mean, we go into detail and say, hey, you know, for this drinking fountain, take it out of service until you have a better plan. You know, for this location, tell us more, what's going on, that type of thing. But it's very detailed, and we walk through all of their results and summarize some of the next steps that they need to do. And that way, they're not left to guess on whether or not they need to leave something in service or not, what they're going to tell their families, etc. And it has worked extremely well in our community. It's a way for us to number one, start by disclosing what their service lines are at the property, and then work with them to understand the water quality within their facilities. After we provide that letter, we then post the results on our website, and then if needed, the health department assists us with that. Next slide. Just a quick moment about some results. We actually, at this point, have worked with over 120 schools, but the results of 48 schools are just a snapshot here on the screen. In those 48 schools, we had a total of 4,177 samples, and for the drinking fountain samples in that sample pool, we had about 4.26% of those that had some type of lead detection, and in a similar fashion of the cooking outlets, about 2.2% of those sample locations had lead detections. Next slide. So Tier 2. Tier 2 is where we are now. We continue with Tier 1, but certainly that's what's considered for us a pretty well-oiled machine at this point, and we just work through that as schools contact us, as customers reach out to us, as we need to help our customers in many ways. But Tier 2 is where we really are spending our time, and quite honestly, it's where we've been spending some sleepless nights trying to figure out how we put together a program so we can remove the lead service lines in our system. As a reminder, in Cincinnati, our ownership challenge is that the utility, we own the public side, and the customer owns the private side into the home. Next slide. So for us to move forward and to really meet our goal of further reducing the risk of lead, a big part of that is to remove the full lead service line. And so we were approved in June of 2017 by our council members with a unanimous vote for us to actually put this program in place. But it's a program where over 15 years we will strive and work to remove all public and private side lead service lines. We know that it will be a cost challenge for a number of our customers, and so we have a cost sharing program where we will provide an incentive grant. So we're going to incentivize our customers to remove the private side by giving them $1,500 towards the removal of the private side. And then the balance of that will be a property assessment for them, which they will be allowed to pay back over 5 to 10 years. And that assessment stays with the property. Next slide. We still recognize that customers will still have a challenge with meeting and paying the balance of that work. And so we have a customer assistance program, which we are working to fund so customers can have some additional assistance with the balance. So we just really started the program this month. And when I say just really started, last week was our first customer under this program that agreed to commit to receiving the $1,500 as a grant and then remove her lead service line on the private side. And so if I recall, I think the total amount for her work is about $4,600. And so she'll be responsible for about $3,100 as a balance for her to then pay back over 5 or 10 years. Next slide. In addition to us removing the lead service lines, we also recognize that we want to do some extensive flushing after the fact, and we want to resample at those locations because we've already seen in some cases, although customers remove their lead service line, they still have some high values in lead samples. And so we want to make sure that we're not leaving them with a false sense of belief that everything is taken care of. So we'll resample after they remove their lead service lines. And if needed, and certainly right after they remove their lines, we will provide water filters, faucet or pitchers, as much as needed until we're comfortable that the levels have been reduced after their line has been replaced. Next slide. So in an overall summary for our program, certainly we have a number of things going on here. We're disclosing the locations clearly through our Lookup Map. We're working to help customers understand the water quality within their homes, et cetera, in schools. But overall, everything that we're doing is trying to move forward to reach our goal to further reduce the risk of lead. And so that goal does not allow us just to remove lead service lines. We understand that we're now in the realm of premise plumbing, where we're working very closely with the customers to understand the water quality in their homes. We're okay with that because we think that's the best solution for our community. It's an expectation of our council members that we would do that. It's certainly an expectation of our customers, and it fits in the mission of what we try to do here in our community in Cincinnati. And so this is our program to date, and certainly what we will continue to do to serve our customers and our community in the best manner possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. That was very informative. We have a couple of questions that just popped in. I thought I'd catch you right now while we have you here. The question came in that said, what was the response of the City Council to this program, in the sense that you would be identifying a problem, but you weren't solid on a solution? Did the City Council push back at all with you releasing all this information about the amount of lead service lines in your community?
No, they didn't push back at all. I mean, early on, we stepped up and said, yes, we have lead service lines in our community. Yes, we know as much as possible from our records where they are. We told them early on we might not know as much on the private side because perhaps customers have removed them and we weren't aware of it. We also told them early on we're going to find some high lead detections in schools, rec centers, businesses, homes, et cetera. And it's not so much that we find it, it's the fact that we find it and we fix it. So we stepped up early on and told them that. And once they heard that, they were like, okay, you've given us the basis of that, the basics of what we're dealing with. And so come back with a plan on how we can reduce the risk of lead, how we can fix these things that we find. And they were real comfortable with that.
And the second question here is a follow-up. What about the schools? Did the schools have any reaction to having you test the water and then them being fearful that they were going to have to pay for a replacement?
No, the schools, it was one public school district here who felt that they just wanted to do representative samples. And by that, they defined it as 2 or 3 samples per school, and they had 55 schools at the time. So they wanted 2 or 3 samples per school to represent the water quality in the school. And we certainly tried to discourage them and not do that. We said, no, you need to do more than that. But it's what they wanted to do. And they went forward with that, and they had 44 out of 55 schools come back with lead detection just in those couple of samples per school. And so the media pounced a little bit there on that. But they pounced in a manner that really told all the other schools, uh-oh, we better figure out what we have. And so at that point, a number of schools came forward and said, you know what, regardless of what we find, we better just go ahead and identify it and then work to then come up with solutions. And so we have been able to work on a regular basis with the schools to help identify grant money to help them replace fixtures when they needed to. Some community funds have helped in some other schools. And so with all that, it wasn't as much as a fearful situation for them once they found out that, number one, we weren't going to just leave them high and dry, but we were going to help them find some solutions and come up with some solutions, talk to their parents and PTAs if we needed to as a collective group. But once they found out that we were willing to do that and help them every way we could, then that fear went away, and it was a really good partnership with all the schools involved.
Well, thank you very much. That was very informative. Our final speaker today is Tom Milner with the Environmental Defense Fund. Tom is EDF's Chemical Policy Director. He leads efforts to remove or minimize hazardous chemicals from products and the marketplace through cross-cutting policy initiatives. His primary focus is on food additive safety and reducing exposure to lead in our homes and communities. He is a chemical engineer and an attorney with experience in chemical safety issues in the workplace, the environment, the home, consumer products, and food. Tom serves on EPA's Children's Health Protection Advisory Committee and played a leading role in an EPA-convened multi-stakeholder work group that made recommendations to the agency to upgrade its lead in drinking water regulations. And I believe that if I remember correctly, they have made amended to their outreach materials for the real estate community on disclosure of lead service lines. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes, it is.
That would be good. Well, with that, I'd like to introduce Tom Milner, Environmental Defense Fund.
Thanks, Doug. And Kathy, you've got a really good program there. It's interesting to see how you've pulled all those pieces together and learned lessons that other communities have had that have been there before for Madison, but you took it to a new level. One of the other things Cincinnati's done is also asked landlords to disclose to prospective tenants whether they've got a lead service line. And the grounding for all of it comes from being transparent. It allows you to do so much more when you can just straightforwardly say, here's what we know, and here's what we are going to try to do. And it won't eliminate lead from the drinking water. It just makes real progress in reducing the levels, especially the spikes that you get from lead service lines. So congratulations, Kathy. And Laura, your job, I mean, Massachusetts has long been working on this one, but it was nice to see you pull those things together and to think through the legislation that can help really get the word out to home buyers and tenants across the state. So what I wanted to do is sort of step back and ask, what can a state do? And lay a little bit of the groundwork, pull a few threads from what Kathy and Laura did, and then sort of give our evaluation of where states have been. Kathy already had a slide that was similar to this, and that is that, you know, lead gets into drinking water either from the service line when it's a lead pipe or from internal plumbing. If you've got a lead service line, about 75% of the lead comes from that service line. And occasionally when you disturb that pipe, whether it's a truck driving down the street, changes in the water chemistry, or moving the pipe, you get particulate, little lead into the water that you drink. And that's the high level exposures that we always want to reduce. And as Kathy said, there's that public and the private side, and that joint ownership, that different ownership that makes it complicated. And as I think Kathy made clear, the utility doesn't own it, but the way Cincinnati's approached it is they have a responsibility as members of the community to try to work through and find some solutions. If you could go to the next slide. And just to guess, the big picture is, just to make sure we define a term, a lead service line is the pipe that connects the main under the street to the home. And the best estimate is there's about 6 million of these around the country. Midwest, Northeast have a lot of them. The state with the most is Illinois, with about 750,000. So about 1 out of every 8 lead service lines is in Illinois, mostly around the Chicago area. And there you got some pictures of what lead pipes are, but you can see how it compares to steel pipes. Lead was popular because it lasted. Next slide. So when we think about opportunities and how states can help encourage the disclosure, help communities get the information out there, you have to think about utilities communicating to their customers. There's the first time. So the first time you tell somebody they have a lead pipe, probably have to do more education because they're not sure what that is. There's reminders of it because property owners forget. And then there's updates. For instance, we're going into your neighborhood, we're working here. And you got to think, the utilities have to think of every one of those touches with the customers as a chance to educate them, not just about lead in general, but about whether their home has a lead service line. So how the state can do that is they can encourage that communication. Ohio is one where it's done a real leader role of getting that information out there. And in fact, all utilities are required to at least estimate the likelihood of having a lead service line in a neighborhood and post those maps publicly on a single site by the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. The other place where disclosure comes in is when people are making important decisions that it may involve a lead service line. Are you buying a home? If you're buying a home, you may want to say, to the owner, get rid of that lead service line before I buy it, or reduce the price this much, or fold it into the mortgage, or I'm going to look for a different home if you don't. Same goes for renting, although the leverage is a little bit different, but a person might choose to put in a filter for a while and tell the landlord that because I'm paying $150 a year for filters, I need that much reduction in the rent because you've got a lead service line. That's why that disclosure like Cincinnati and Philadelphia have are really important. Could also come up when you're choosing a child care center or a school. Schools don't often have the lead service lines, but a child care center may have them. Lead service lines rarely came over 2-inch pipe because at 25 pounds per foot for a 2-inch pipe, that's pretty heavy lead pipe. But child care centers, especially one that's smaller or older, might have one, and they could be exposed. You could do it when you're selecting a restaurant. The maps would tell you whether, you look up the address and you could find it, whether the restaurant might have a lead service line. And you might want to make sure it's filtered when you go in. The other one is just in general, making decisions about where we work and where children play. The water fountain in the park, how does that pipe come in? So asking some of those questions, that's what that map that Cincinnati did, Washington, D.C. does, Boston, and other communities have is so important. You can move to the next slide. I'll give you some more examples. So when utilities approach it, they're obviously giving a letter to the property owners. That is the easiest way to communicate. Door hangers also work, but not everybody goes through the front door. Many people use the garage or back door, especially when it's snowing outside or raining. But letters, phone calls, emails. There's lots of different ways that we can use all those media to make communication. And the state legislature can help that by recognizing those and encouraging them. And we put them into 3 different options. One is PDF maps. Basically, this is what Ohio requires for all of the utilities in the state community water system, to have a PDF map so you know what the likelihood of this neighborhood having one. I'm actually a little nervous about PDF maps because it doesn't tell me about my home, and it may just discourage people from moving into a community that may likely have lead service lines without enabling the person to take action on my particular home or the home I'm looking at buying. Searchable databases. Cleveland and many other communities have examples of this, where you can look up an address and get a result. It isn't a map. That's why we really like Cincinnati, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. Columbus has got another one, Columbus, Ohio, and there are more coming online every day that give you interactive maps so you can look at a neighborhood and understand more about it. And we want to create an incentive for a property owner who's selling their house to get it replaced. The ideal would be to have real estate listing services such as Zillow or Redfin be able to tell people, just as they do about the quality of the schools in the neighborhood, to tell them about the likelihood of a lead service line in that home. So those are the different ways they could do it. You could go to the next slide. We'll give some more information. This is what a PDF map would look like. We picked Cleveland because while it's still a PDF map, it does give you an idea of where the lead service lines, and they rate it on 1 to 10% or by 10% unit. So you can get an idea of where they're at, but for the service area for the utility. So it's a good way to get people started. If you go to the next slide, you can see a different way. This is the online search engine that Cleveland has. And if you download the webinar PDF, you get to follow the link. But you type in an address, and on the right, you see that little box pops up of yes, you have lead, or you likely have lead, or no, you don't. Now, the problem is this information is only about the public portion, not the lead pipe that's on private property. So because utilities don't know much about that, they often don't want to talk about it. From a transparency perspective, that's why I'm a big fan of Cincinnati, DC, and others, because they do tell people whether they think they do or don't or may have it. So a searchable database is a step up, but it's only address by address by address. You don't get to see the map. So slide to the next one, please. So this is Columbus. Columbus does have a searchable map, and when you search for a particular area, it zooms in on it, and it looks like this. The blue shading comes and says that means that it's part of the city of Columbus's water service area. And a blue dot on this one means it's possibly public side lead service line, and an X means it's not. I have never been quite clear why a red X would be the indicator for no lead, but that's how they do it. The key is it doesn't talk to you about the private side. And one concern is that it may not, people may walk away and say, I don't have a lead service line, I'm okay. And again, communities are experimenting with this, trying to figure out the best way. And Columbus was good just to get it up and start that process and then keep upgrading it. It's a continuous process. That's why, as Cincinnati described, as a tier 1, 2 is probably a tier 3 down the line. Let's take a look and just remind you about the Cincinnati approach. The next slide. So again, you can see it gives both sides, the left side being the public and the right side being the property owner's side. And we actually have a very hard time finding ones where there's no info. You have pretty good information in Cincinnati, which makes it easier on the transparency side. So the coloring was a little cleaner for us. Right now, Environmental Defense Fund, because we're a bunch of scientists and engineers, I'm an engineer, and a couple of lawyers, we have a behavioral scientist on staff who says, whoa, you guys make presumptions that everybody's like you, that everybody's an engineer, and I like engineers. But what they say is, you need to go out and test this. So we're going to run a behavioral study to look at how these different maps work and what works best. So if you're looking at options for your community, for your state, we're going to have information probably by spring where we can share with you what maps work best, how do people go down rabbit holes, get confused, what do they take away. So we're doing this with about 750 people across Ohio using Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati's approaches as examples. See what works and what doesn't. So beyond that behavioral, we're looking at how do you communicate to property owners. So let's go to the next one. So this one is just to look at how states are helping communities. You can look at 13 states that, by the way, represent 3.3 million out of the 6 million lines that lead service lines. So this is a lot of action where the states have taken different approaches. Some have set goals, some have enabled funding, some have required an inventory. We mark Ohio as one that requires an inventory because the first step is get that state level. And then other ones were mandate practices. But you can also see how some states are rated on the requiring disclosure. And the next slide gives more details on that. So look at the next slide. So what we did is we looked at all of the disclosure laws across the country and said, what is the likelihood of a home buyer being told that you have a lead service line? We gave credit to voluntary disclosure if we think it's practiced by, the Real Estate Association encourages it. We did notice that Massachusetts was an F. It does have the lead-based paint disclosure, but it doesn't have a broader environmental disclosure or other disclosures that we could find. The Real Estate Association has one, but we think that there are opportunities to do better disclosure in those states. And as Laura pointed out, Connecticut, New York, and Delaware are all states that say, do you have a lead pipe? So they say to the property owner, if you've got a lead pipe, you need to tell people, whether it's inside the home or a lead service line. That's part of the disclosure. Illinois and Wisconsin are interesting because they say you only need to tell the person if you've got a lead pipe if you think the lead pipe is dangerous. Not sure how that works in practice because the property owner may not have much of an incentive to disclose. Other ones do it as part of the, we'll look at the next slide to give you some examples of how you approach it, how we graded these. So you can see the three that had mandatory disclosure. We set an A- because there still is no requirement that the property owner be told, affirmatively told by the utility that they have a lead service line. B, we gave it if it was a mandatory disclosure of the pipe material, even if but they didn't specifically call out lead. Whether they said you have to identify it, they may have said plastic, copper, and then other, and didn't name lead, or if they said it was unsafe. The other one is a voluntary disclosure that specifically called out lead pipes. That was New Mexico and Pennsylvania. The other one is a mandatory disclosure of general environmental hazards. It will only work if the property seller, the property owner, thinks that a lead pipe, a lead service line is an environmental hazard. 19 states have that, but there's a weakness there because I may not, as a property owner, not really think it's a problem because it was fine by me. We did say if you voluntarily disclose pipe material, that's Arizona, then you got credit for it. And then if you didn't even require disclosure of environmental hazards, the likelihood of you getting it is very low. So we gave 8 states Ds, and then 12 states have no general limited, or they only have a limited or no disclosure requirement. But again, for lead-based paint, there's a federal disclosure requirement. Some states like Massachusetts in particular and Rhode Island have lead-based paint disclosure requirements. When Laura was talking, she was looking at modifying Massachusetts lead-based paint disclosures. There's room for progress. There are good examples. And one of our other behavioral studies we're going to work on is how good does this disclosure work? What's the best way to tell somebody about this? So we're working with the Cornell University, a behavioral scientist there, to test that out. And we're also testing whether a home inspector, when they tell people, home inspectors are required to look for lead service lines and lead pipes and disclose and to tell the person about it. But how that happens is important, so that'll be another part of our study. Go to the next slide, please. So there is a group that's working on this. It's called the Lead Service Line Replacement Collaborative. This is a group of 25 public health, housing, environmental groups, the associations that represents the water utilities, private companies. It's also the municipalities, the National League of Cities is a member, and consumer advocates at the state level, as well as the state drinking water regulators, are all members of it. And the idea is to how do we help accelerate local voluntary lead service line replacement. We want to get more examples, like Cincinnati, but across the country. Right now, 36 communities are already taking steps to replace their lead service lines. Cincinnati's probably far ahead of the two, except for two cities that have already done it. That's Lansing, Michigan, and Madison, Wisconsin. So if we could slide to the next one, you can see the list of organizations that are members. All of these organizations, then Resolve is a facilitation group that leads it, have joined together and said, we want to help do this. And importantly, we want to do it in a way that's equitable, that recognizes that people without money are not going to voluntarily be able to replace it very easily. Those with resources are going to be able to find the resources to replace the lead service lines. So we need to make sure that that is done in an equitable manner that recognizes all the differences that communities have. We go to the next slide, please. So here are some resources, and we have a web page, lots of them, that we track what's going on lead service lines, and then the lead service line replacement collaborative is up there as well. That's all I have for today. Doug, did you want to take any questions?
Yeah, it seems like we have quite a few questions from the audience. The first one I'd like to bring up is kind of a mix between Laura and yourself, Tom, but basically the question was, in Massachusetts, Laura, did you see much reaction from the real estate community? Have they been receptive to this legislation, or have they are they giving you pushback?
Laura?
I haven't seen too much reaction on this legislation yet. I think it still needs a little bit of time, but I do think the disclosure legislation that we've introduced is among the least controversial options because it doesn't require anyone to actually replace the pipes. It just requires disclosure. So in that sense, I hope it will be a little bit less controversial among the real estate community because we're not requiring actual expense on the part of the homeowner or landlord. We're just requiring disclosure.
Thank you. The second question.
That's pretty. Let me.
Go ahead,
if I
Tom.
could jump in, Doug. We found in some of those voluntary forms were often by the real estate associations. So the real estate agents knew that lead pipes was relevant and had it in their forms even before Flint made all the news. So I think they're not opposed, but as Laura said, they don't want to be mandatory removal because they think that that's something that has to be done and to be done negotiated between the parties, and they don't want to mandate an inspection. That's why it's so important the utilities give that information to property owners to know it. The other challenge is real estate agents tend not to want to do things that delay the process, the sales process. But a lead service line is a discrete activity. You can remove it. It's not like redoing all the paint in the house. Doug?
Yeah, the next question is going to be for Kathy. We seem to have a lot of people who are interested in Cincinnati's effort to provide the free lead test to customers. But the question came forward, how was that paid for? Did that come out of your general fund, or did you have a special appropriation for it?
So it comes out of our operations budget. So we looked at our budget and figured out how we could move some things around. And we keep track of those costs associated with all the testing that we're doing.
How much do the free tests cost, your program?
Internally, I have to get those numbers and share with you, but we track all of that. I just haven't looked at it recently. So I could certainly get that for you. Because we actually have a laboratory in-house, so we're not getting the sample kit and sending it someplace. We actually get the bottle here, and then we analyze it ourselves.
Okay.
I could give us some insight on that on the commercial stuff.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Doug, if I could. That on the commercial level, we've done some sampling because we're working on child care centers, and we often see them in the $16 to $20 range. Make sure you get one that's state certified, but their labs have really ramped up to do some of the sampling. So think in the terms of about $20 a sample.
Yeah, and to speak to that, I know the last time we calculated, we were below $16. For some reason, I'm remembering 12, 14 was the average that we had internally if we looked at all of our labor and everything to go with it. And we would always work to try to get that lower. And that's why I know in some months it was lower, some it was higher. But I can certainly get those numbers for you. But we do it internally. We don't send it out to a lab because we're actually certified as a lab to do it for people.
And the next question really goes to all three speakers. But in general, does disclosure of lead service line affect the property value of the property? Does it make it go down, or is this something that has not been an issue?
I'll go ahead and give a shot at that. Nobody really knows. The assumption is because it costs to replace it and it affects the house, it reduces it some amount. Nobody really knows. But that's one of the things we're going to try to figure out in the behavioral study is just how much does it shape people's action.
Thank you very much. And there's another question here regarding disclosure of child care centers. Someone brought forth that they noticed that New Jersey has a program for requiring child care centers to be environmentally safe, but they don't know if disclosure of the lead service line is part of that. Have you had any experience, Tom, of disclosure of lead service lines in child care centers?
So we've looked at the 7 states that require testing of lead in drinking water at child care, and the one city is New York City. Oregon is one. I'm counting it as in there because they proposed it. So right now it's really, I think it's 6 cities, or 6 states, and Oregon's on the bubble. Illinois just released its testing requirements last week as one of the other states. None of them require an inspection for a lead service line. So you could have a lead service line and do all this testing and get erratic results that are low one time and not another based on when the pipe might have been disturbed. And it creates some real questions. So we think you want to remove it. And because child care are smaller, they're much more likely to have a lead service line. Illinois and their directive did not call out, did not say when you're doing testing, you should also inspect the service line. And that's a shortcoming.
This is Kathy regarding child care facilities.
Yeah.
Child care facilities for us in Cincinnati, that's a different animal. I mean, they are not interested in testing. They really strive to understand it a lot. We have about 1,100 child care facilities in our service area, and it has been a challenge, a heavy challenge for us to try to reach out to them and really just offer free testing to them. We had already sent them letters letting them know that we believe from our records they had a lead service line, but that didn't spark them to come to a number of informational meetings that we had and hosted just for them. And so it has been a struggle to really just relate to them and let them know that we're here for them. We can offer free testing. We can assist them in many ways, and they just fail to respond to our repeated inquiries and requests to have them come to informational meetings so we can share information and help themselves. So it's a big challenge for us to even reach them in any way.
Well, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to all 3 of our speakers, Laura, Kathy, and Tom. This has been very informative. And as I mentioned, that this presentation will be up on the NCSL website in just a few days, and so it can be downloaded at that point. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, and hopefully everybody will have a great afternoon. Good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.